number 60 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. We have a special show for you today. I kind of feel a little bit like a Haber sandwich wedged in between a couple of Martinez's. We have the Honorable Carlos J. Martinez joining us today. Carlos is our local elected public defender here in Miami-Dade County. I'll tell you a little bit about Carlos in a moment. And of course, we also have Ed Martinez, my co-host and colleague. We've entitled today's show, episode number 60, Public Defenders Are Super Lawyers, Dispelling Silly Notions About PDs. I've been practicing law for 31 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people make disparaging comments about public defenders. They're not lawyers, they're public pretenders, they don't care. I find this extremely insulting, and not because I have a horse in the race. I was never a public defender. Unlike Carlos Martinez, who was an assistant public defender prior to becoming the elected public defender, and unlike Ed Martinez, who was an assistant state attorney prior to entering the private defense field, I started day one, hung my shingle, practicing criminal defense law. I was fortunate enough to connect with two former assistant public defenders who were now, at that time in 1991, in private practice. The illustrious Jay White and the famous Rick Friedman. Rick has been a guest on this show in the past. Jay and Rick taught me how to be a lawyer, taught me how to be a defense attorney. And they learned how to be lawyers by working under Bennett Brummer, who hired Carlos J. Martinez, I believe in the year 1990. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Carlos worked under Bennett Brummer for about 18 years until he became elected public defender in 2008. He's in his third term now. God willing, he will run for a fourth term. He had huge shoes to fill. Bennett Brummer is a legend. And Carlos has done an absolutely fabulous job administrating and running this office. Just so you understand a little bit about Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office, it's the largest public defender's office in the state of Florida and one of the biggest in the nation. They have an annual budget of $34 million, over 400 employees, and they handle better than 65,000 cases a year. And by the way, pre-COVID, that was probably closer to 100,000 cases a year. It's a very big office. Carlos is a very busy man. He dedicates time not only to the people of Miami-Dade County who elected him, but also throughout the state of Florida. He serves as the president of the Florida Public Defenders Association and as the government lawyer liaison to the Florida Bar's Board of Governors. Carlos has done an awful lot of work in our community, and we'll talk a lot about that. He's done an awful lot, not only for PD clients, but for all criminal defense clients, because we'll talk also about his collaborations with the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and how his office is directly responsible for improving the quality of the private defense bar. He's also done a lot of work for anybody else who's asked. He's done training and technical assistance for counties in New York, California, Arizona, Indiana, even the Honduran National Office of Public Defense. So with that long intro, and I apologize for taking so long, Carlos, thank you so very much for taking time out of your exceedingly busy schedule to join us today. It's a pleasure to have you, sir.
It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you. So, like I started talking about a little bit earlier on, I really take great exception, and I get it regularly. Private defense lawyers are hired oftentimes by people who have been represented by public defenders, be it at a bond hearing, an initial appearance, because they're booked into a jail, they're taken in front of a judge within 24 hours, they either don't know or didn't have time to reach out to a private lawyer, and there's always a public defender sitting in bond court waiting to assist anybody and everybody who's booked into the jail and accused of committing a crime. So sometimes these people come to us after that and they're either dissatisfied or unhappy or belly aching about one thing or another. Other times there are people who are actually get the PD appointed and they wind up leaving the PD's office. Now, in fairness, I have to say this happens with private defense attorneys just as much, if not more, because a huge portion of my practice, and I would assume Ed's as well, are cases that come to us from other lawyers who the client is dissatisfied with. Whether the lawyer did anything right or wrong, proper or improper, is irrelevant. It's just the perception of the client. But what we want to do today is we want to talk about public defenders as people, as attorneys, how difficult it is for them to get this job, how difficult it is for them to keep this job, and what it takes to really do the job. And then we can talk about some other, stuff that I think people might find interesting in terms of your overlap in dealing with the court system, in dealing with the legislature, in dealing with the Florida Supreme Court and the Florida Bar, all of whom are, pardon the expression, but a pain in all of our ass to some degree or another. But it's politics, and that's part of what you have to do as an elected official. So let's jump right into debunking these misplaced notions about public defenders not being lawyers. So you scour the country looking for these candidates to come work for you, and they come to you from all over the country, correct?
Correct. So thank you for addressing and starting with that issue, because that is really an important issue. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be on the show with you and to take advantage of this opportunity is that there is not enough information out there about the work that assistant public defenders do. So part of the challenge that we have is the volume. Our volume of cases is incredible. But guess what? The volume of cases is what gives our attorneys the expertise, because they're handling so many similar legal issues in really a compressed time frame. Because when they start working with us, we will give them training, we will supervise them, we'll provide them support, but they're handling the cases. And you learn very quickly what the important issues are. You learn very quickly how to get to the bottom of an issue, how to investigate a case. So I'm very proud of the work that we do here in the training that we provide our lawyers, the supervision that we provide our lawyers, and also the tools. We also provide our attorneys legal research tools. So every single one of my attorneys has access to Westlaw and to Westlaw National. And as you know, it is important for the lawyers to stay up on the law and to be able to use whatever software is available to be able to do that. And on top of that, you already mentioned the extensive training that they get. Now, I want to get to the special sauce, okay, so to speak. So the special sauce that we have is that when we recruit and when we hire, we're looking for individuals who are going to be able to develop the skills and knowledge and the level of competence that we want the lawyers to have. And guess what? We're also looking for heart. So if somebody's coming to the public defender's office, we want to make sure that it's people who are coming here because they want to help people who cannot afford to hire a lawyer. We have attorneys, and we have excellent attorneys that come in that will stay with us as long as they can, because the reality is we cannot pay competitive salaries yet. I always say yet, because we're always working on that. But they have heart, and it is highly competitive to get a job with this office. We interview several hundred every year that we will give them, the first screening interview. And if you can get through the screening interview, then you will probably be invited to do a hiring panel with about 5 experienced lawyers who will, have a very practical hiring panel where we're presenting scenarios, hypotheticals. They have to do a cross-examination. They have to do an opening. They have to do a close. The bottom line, it's extremely competitive. And once the panel recommends that maybe we should hire this person, I do the last interview. So to give you an idea on how many people that is, I interviewed in November and December. I interviewed 33 individuals who had gone through that rigorous process of calling through to see the best of the best from the country. We don't just recruit in Miami-Dade County or even in the state of Florida. We recruit from New York State, particularly New York City, that have so many law schools, from Boston, Chicago, DC. We recruit everywhere because we want to make sure that Dade County residents have the best legal representation that money cannot buy.
I got to jump in here a second, Michael, because I first have to start with the obligatory. I was a former state attorney. I knew Carlos back when, and much like FSU and UM, there's still that rivalry. Sorry, Carlos, you're still FSU. You're still there's that rivalry. I just got to get that out of the way. And no matter how big your caseload is per state public defender, the state attorney's caseload is always larger because we have to deal with private lawyers too. Now,
100% agree with you.
That being said, nothing but the utmost respect for your office. Mainly, the biggest difference, I think, and Kathy may hate me if she sees this show, but the training at the public defender's office is light years, head and shoulders above the training we get. And I'm not blaming Kathy because, as you know, Carlos, your office is extremely busy. So is the state attorney's office. I mean, there's just so many cases that it's hard to do some of the other peripheral stuff that you would want to do as an office. But I got to tell you, I've always been in awe of the training that your PDs get. They are always a little bit ahead of the state attorneys. Now, eventually we all catch up because you practice. And one of the things you get at the state is what Carlos said. I find that former public defenders and former state attorneys, not to say that private lawyers who started like Michael can't get there, but generally speaking, private public defender, former public defenders, and former state attorneys end up being, for lack of a better term, better trial lawyers because we've done it in the fire. Because the example I give young state attorneys, just like public defenders, being a public defender and a state attorney, especially early on in your career when you're a young lawyer as a C, correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, is like being a triage lawyer in the Civil War. You don't have the tools. You don't have the time. The bodies just keep coming, and you've got to deal with it. Once you get that training and you go private, oh my God, it's like being a surgeon in an upscale, hospital. You got all the time in the world. You got all the resources in the world. And once you've learned how to do it without resources and without time and with a lot of stress, this becomes super easy. And so I've always said that your office, the utmost respect for the work that you guys do. You just get a bad rap because of all the other offices that you see on TV. And the fact, like Carlos says, we are inundated with cases, just so many cases, that it makes it hard sometimes for the practicing lawyer to be able to do everything all the time. And so some clients want you to call them once a week. You can't do that. You got too many cases. So they get frustrated and they hire a private lawyer. So just the little things, but nothing but the utmost respect for my hated rival, the public defender's office.
Let me just say, apropos of that, if Kathy Fernandez-Rundle is watching, or if anybody from her office is watching, you're welcome to come on at any point in time. We'd love to have you.
And let me clarify, so I don't get blackballed. Kathy does training, and very good training, and she gives us access to Westlaw when you're there and a lot of things that Carlos does. It's just, I don't know what you do, Carlos, but the training is just a little bit better. If I'm going to be honest, it is. It really is.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, we're kind of jumping out of order here, but that's quite all right. I don't know how many years ago. I mean, it's got to be 15 years now, maybe more. I don't remember it under Bennett, but I certainly remember it during your tenure, Carlos. The partnership between the Public Defender's Office and the Miami chapter of Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. The FACDL is a private bar. If you're a private defense attorney, you're welcome to join, and then you get to group together, kind of like the Public Defender's Office has its own little huddle with support staff and with people that they can always go to, and questions can always be answered. There's always someone to field it. Well, the FACDL kind of fills that gap for the private bar.
Right.
But this partnership that you have cultivated is really something special, because you've opened up at least a significant portion, no less than once a month, sometimes more, of continuing legal education training sessions that your office sponsors, that your office puts on for your staff, that you have opened and invited the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the private bar, to attend. Sometimes you invite us to participate as guest lecturers. Sometimes we provide, other types of support in terms of finances or what have you. But really, your opening that door to the private defense bar has done so much to improve the quality of lawyering, defense lawyering in this town on the private sector, because we started this show, and I use that term public pretender, which we've all heard and is absolutely insulting. But you know what? There's a hell of a lot more, let's use the word bad, unethical, inattentive lawyers on the private side. And I would assume percentage-wise far superior than in your office.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
So I think by opening up those doors and assisting your training to us, you really have helped everybody. This is a major thing for the community, and I thank you. I mean, I know all of my colleagues do. We look forward to those seminars every week, every month.
Absolutely.
So thank you for pointing that out. And really, what I've done is built on what Bennett Brummer had already done. And Bennett worked closely with FACDL, and we would host at least once a year a meeting of the FACDL board, which turned into a training. When I became the public defender back in 2009, you may recall that one of the biggest challenges that I had is that I did not have enough attorneys to handle the 125,000 cases that we had in 2009, 2010. So one of the first things that I did is actually reach out to the FACDL and the private bar and say, even though you cannot handle all my excessive caseload, I need your help. And FACDL stepped up and they took over in the felony division. Experienced attorneys took over felony cases. So even though the number of cases was only about 200 cases, I can tell you that had a huge impact, not just on those individual clients that were now getting quality representation, but it had a huge impact on the morale of my office, that the attorneys felt like there is some help coming to us. The other benefit of that shared work with FACDL is that it really helped educate the public on the importance that we had of being able to fund public defender offices adequately. And it was shown by individuals who gave their time, who gave their talent to represent some of our clients.
I got to tell you, Carlos, it's the least we can do. It's the least the FACDL can do, because you provide not just training, okay? People need to know this. You provide us depot rooms. You provide us Zoom depots. You're always helping private lawyers to be able to practice law and represent their clients, even though those clients are not yours. And really, honestly, none of your business. It's not your case, not your clients, but you help those clients by helping the clients' lawyers. And we really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for recognizing. I look at that in two ways. One of them is I'm really helping by helping the private bar. I'm really helping residents of Miami-Dade County. I'm the public defender, and obviously I run an office. I run a large law firm, but there are still individuals in Dade County that are being impacted in the criminal legal system. And to me, if we are able to assist individuals who are practicing law with the training that we provide, with the resources that we provide, and the video deposition rooms, yeah, that's been a big deal.
Okay.
The other big deal is when I became the public defender, when we had those huge caseloads. In the felony division, I had attorneys handling 150 felonies at a time, which is incredible. It borders, if not, actually is malpractice. And
Civil
that,
War, my friend. It's triage in the Civil War. The
yeah,
bodies
yeah.
keep coming. It's a
So
lot.
one of the first things that I did is try to figure out how can I save my attorneys time in the things that they're doing so that they can actually do something meaningful with and for a client. So one of the key areas that I identified early and I was able to get Miami-Dade County to help me with is to install video equipment in the jails so that our clients can communicate with us and we can communicate with them. And I
That's
made that available to the private bar. This is pre-Zoom time.
I know. It's the
I
best.
made it available because I felt it is really important that we focus our resources on how much time are we spending on important things versus on things that waste time, like driving and
that's
spending time in this traffic
Yep.
in Miami-Dade County. The last one that I'm really thankful for with the private bar, and in particular to Margot Moss, FACDL, and other individuals who have been financially contributing, is Gideon's Hope. And as you know, Gideon's Hope is an initiative that the private bar started, headed up by Margot Moss, to actually collect funds so that every year 1 to 3 lawyers from my office can actually get the equivalent of a $5,000 scholarship. So that way it can supplement their salary. And by supplementing their salary, I can actually try to retain them for longer. That's been a godsend. And I'm forever grateful for the bar for doing that.
But Carlos, you don't
brings
give
up actually
credit.
two things. I'm sorry, Ed. That brings up two things that I wanted to hit on. Um, One of them I wanted to hit on was jail visits because obviously it's a necessary component, maybe more so for many PDs than for private lawyers. We all have some clients who are incarcerated. They're being detained pre-trial. Public defenders, I think per capita, probably have a larger portion of their audit. But I can tell you that, for 31 years, I've been running out to the various different jail facilities in this county. Sometimes you have to go to Metro West if you live up in the Aventura area where I do to get to Metro West. If you're
Wow.
lucky, it's an hour and 15 minutes. Then you got to worry about maybe finding parking. If you're lucky, then you got to worry about how long it takes them to even let you in the front door, how long you have to rot to get a room, if there is a room.
Don't forget
There
about
could be
lockdown.
there
God
could be
forbid you get
right.
caught.
There could be a lockdown. There could be absolutely anything. Now, imagine I'm one lawyer going out to see one client. Usually, public defenders oftentimes have to go out and schedule 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 visits in a session. So imagine the drive time, the wait time, the processing time. Nothing happens quickly in the jail. It's not like they're hopping and jumping to get you your next interview subject. So those video visitation situations have been absolutely fabulous, and your office really spearheaded that. And I think you can, at least as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if this is reality, but to my mind, you can take credit, at least in part, if not large part, for the jail now making that available to private defense bar vis-a-vis their own visitation center, which they opened in the old property room right adjacent to your office. So, we're able to do these things in large part because you already created the infrastructure. You made the means and the technology available so that corrections could be persuaded. I mean, not that it's not in their interest too, right? They don't need to be catering to us. They've got other things that they'd rather be doing. they've got enough visitation with family members and this and that. If they can keep the lawyers out of there, so much the better, right? So that was one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on from what you said was turnover. Um, One thing that is constant, two things that are constant in your office is caseload and turnover. Every single day, new cases come into the system because every single day people get arrested for new offenses. Every new person that gets booked into the jail generates a new case number, generates a new initial appearance, generates a new file for your office as well as the clerk. So you've got a constant influx of cases. Now you've got lawyers who are working there. I don't know what your terms are. I know in the state they usually do a 3-year commitment when you sign up to be an assistant state attorney. I'm assuming you have a similar agreement with your new hires. What is your average employee retention time, and how quickly do you deal with turnover issues?
So thank you for bringing that up, because that is actually you hit on the number one issue that we have right now in the public defender's office, and that also Kathy Rundle has in the state attorney's office, which is the incredible amount of turnover. And we know the cause of turnover. The issue is, are we going to take care of what the problem is? The good news that I got to tell you, and I got to give you a little bit of background, is the legislature, over the last 5 years, we have been working closely with our legislature to increase salaries. So we've had several increases over time. The first one was increasing the starting salary is $50,000, which of course that's not enough money for anyone to live in Miami-Dade County. But that was the first step. And then this last year, thanks to the legislature, we were able to get the most substantial increases that assistant state attorneys and assistant public defenders had ever gotten in Florida history. And what we were able to get per lawyer was roughly about $12,000 minimum. That made a big impact in reducing turnover. So my turnover, to give you an idea how bad it could be, my goal is to have 230 lawyers. I have not been able to hire and retain more than 215, but I'm still going for 230 because that is a manageable caseload.
Sounds like the weight that the other Martinez is trying to hit.
Can everybody see that? Okay, I'm just in case. Is it for you in stereo?
Oh my God.
Let me ask you, Carlos, let me ask you this. You talk about dealing, the legislature, this, that. Well, the legislature doesn't do anything just because they wake up one morning and decide, hey, you know what, here's what we're going to do. They have to be lobbied. They have to be persuaded. They have to be pressured. What's that process? I mean, I'm assuming part of your administrative, curse.
So what the process looks like, I'll tell you about last year, which was the most interesting year. I've been going to the legislature since about 1996, because Bennett would have me go up there on really legislative issues, substantive issues, rather than budget issues. But since my first year, that was that hellish year where they cut my budget 14%. In 18 months, they cut it 14%.
Wow.
I have been going to the legislature every year, and every year we try to focus on funding, particularly funding for lawyer salaries and staff salaries. But this past year, I went up to Tallahassee. The session 2022, the session was in January and February. So I went up there. The first week that I went up there, I got COVID up there. So I came back to Miami with COVID, and I was out for 14 days working from home because I could not go to Tallahassee. But I still lobbied in Tallahassee, particularly with one of my lawyers and with the Florida Public Defender Association. And As soon as I got better, I started going back to Tallahassee again. And I can tell you the raises that happened last year would not have happened had it not been for public defenders lobbying in, day out with the Senate president and with the Senate. And the Senate, at the last minute, the Senate came through, and then the House came through. And that's why we were able to do that adjustment. This year, I have already been going to Tallahassee. I was just up there last week to make sure that whatever raises assistant state attorneys receive, that my attorneys are going to receive.
Do you guys work in conjunction, like together on those issues? Do you work with the state attorney's office on that?
100% with Kathy Rundle. We have worked 100% together. We end up typically working up the talking points and sharing it with them. And then in Tallahassee, we're in tandem, going for the same amounts, going for the same process, because we have the same issues. The statewide public defender turnover was 28% last fiscal year. The state attorneys had 23% turnover. The good turnover is when you're at 10%.
Yep.
At 23 or 28%, you're totally out of whack because you're spending a lot of state money on retraining individuals. And not only that, you are really impacting negatively the public perception of the criminal legal system. Because you can imagine, I had last year, and it upset me, but that's the reality. I had a lot of low-level felonies, what they call here the C cases. I had a lot of low-level felonies that have been open for about a year, 4 attorneys handling the case. That is just untenable.
Wow.
And for the prosecutor, as Edward pointed out, the prosecutors, they have to deal not just with public defender cases, but with private attorney cases and with conflict attorney cases. So they have 100%. So when you have that level of turnover, alleged victims have to wait and wait and wait until their cases are resolved. And the victims also have to relive the traumatization because all of a sudden nothing is happening with their cases because the state attorney cannot get the information from the police department. We cannot get the information from the state. The judge is trying to push all of us to move forward with the cases, but we cannot because we don't have the information that we need to adequately prepare that criminal case. So it has a real impact on residents of Miami-Dade County, whether they be accused or victims. It has a huge impact.
It's funny, Mike, but when I joked about the rivalry, I really meant it the way I said it. This is not a Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. This is a Florida State UM type of rivalry, University of Florida, which means what? If FSU goes to the national championship, we're rooting for him because
we are.
He's like my brother. So it's a rivalry that we have, but it's a very friendly one and an amicable one because we go through the same things. It's just one is a prosecutor, the other is a PD, but we're experiencing the same problems. And I know that when I was there, Kathy was always, working together with Bennett, especially with the budget issues and even on some of the substantive stuff because it helped each other out. There's some things that the PDs would rather see happen in criminal cases that the state attorneys agree with because it would make everybody's life easier. It helps the victims. It helps the community. So we do work together. That's why I specifically said the rivalry is like an FSU UM. We love
brotherly rivalry. So,
right.
Let me ask you. I would assume that the same type of intensity and I guess maybe to some degree camaraderie exists with regards to dealing with the court system. We're constantly, and it's not because we don't want to get along. We all have different pressures on us from our various prisms and vantage points. But there are certainly things where you need to go to the administrative office of the courts periodically and try and get some relief. Whether it's I don't know, it could be any of a million things. But do you have the same type of situation when you go to say, the bar or to the administrative office of the courts, or even dealing with the Supreme Court, I would suppose, on rules issues and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. There has to be a level of collaboration, particularly amongst the leadership of the courts, the state attorney's office, public defender's office, even the police departments. We work in a lot of ways, which people would be shocked to find out, but we work in a lot of ways when we're dealing with some issue. Like, for example, when we worked on the issue of civil citations for kids under 18 that were getting arrested for delinquency cases, guess who came to the table? The day chief of police was right at the table. And with the state attorney, looking at the cases and trying to figure out how can we work with these children that are getting involved in the court system, so at least the first or the second time, it doesn't ruin their lives forever. And we have worked very well together with the courts, the police departments, particularly chiefs of police, and with the state attorney and the public defender's office. And so thank you for bringing that. I wanted to answer one of the earlier questions that you have. That is one of the most troubling things, and one of the things that is actually persuading the legislature in committing to increasing the attorney salaries this year again. And that is the issue of retention. Okay. I mentioned the multiple attorneys handling the one case, but here's a stat that when I looked at it, it was so different last year, even a year ago. So this year, in 2021, January of 2021, I hired 34 attorneys. January of 2023, 2 years later, I only have 17 of those attorneys. So my turnover is 50% within the first 2 years.
Wow.
So are those are the, you mean of those new hires, you lost 16 of them, almost half?
I lost 17 of them. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's really quickly.
Do they?
And by the way, that is with a commitment for 2 years.
So
that's
Wow.
So it is a 3-year commitment in your office as well.
There was. I ended up eliminating it because I'm not going to have rules that if in practice they don't work, I'm like, why have the rule? So
Right.
I went back to, if you want to be with this office and you want to stay with this office, I want you to be committed while you're here, not a 2-year commitment where it feels like a sentence to work in the public defender's office.
Good point.
Years.
Good point,
No.
because it happens in the state. At least I think they still have a 3-year commitment that
They
Kathy still.
do.
And I can tell you from having been there, 2 things. One, even the ones that put that fulfill their commitment but are counting the days, they're not doing discounting any service. Honestly, there's exceptions, but by and large, generally speaking, they're doing the minimal amount of work to not get in trouble and not get fired, and they're just out. And the other one is, the truth is, Carlos, I don't know if you know this, but in the legal community, nobody cares. People would break their commitment all the time as state attorneys and get hired for 6-figure jobs. They really don't care because they know that, again, I hate to beat a dead horse, but I think the people that are hiring understand that it is an extremely difficult job. You really are almost like, without the actual life and death that occurs in war, it's a bombardment of cases and caseloads, and you never get a breather, and you go to trial one day and you're in trial for a week, and the judge is like, oh, when is that trial over? On Thursday? Okay, well, we'll pick a jury on Friday. And you're like, excuse me, this is exhausting. Emotionally, it's an exhausting job.
It
And
is.
Let me ask something that's a little bit off subject. I mean, it's on but off. I want to talk a little bit about depositions because they were brought up. We talked about the depot room. Ed and I have very different philosophies on depots. I generally do not take them. I would say I've probably taken a handful of depots in the last 15 years, probably not more than 5 depots. Sometimes you have to. I mean, you don't have a choice in some cases, but in my experience, I find that I do more harm than good by taking a depot. And when you contrast the Florida system with the federal system, where there are no depots, And we're only one of 3 or 4 states in the country that even allow criminal court depots. Most follow the federal rule. So it used to be back in the day when I was a young lawyer, I took depots of every single witness in every single case. I spent more time in your office than I did in mine because I would constantly be there taking depositions. Depots are expensive. They're time consuming. They're cost consuming. You have to pay for process. You have to pay court reporters. You have to pay for transcripts. You have to take time out of your schedule that you can't replace to take those depots. Do you guys have a policy or a protocol on that? Or is it just, they do it when they feel it's appropriate? Or how do you approach that?
So my approach has been since the Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, came out with their decision in 2013.
On third degree felonies?
What's that?
About third degree felonies?
No. About when we had excessive caseloads and how the Supreme Court criticized the triage system and essentially said, this is not what the bar rules require in terms of competence, in terms of diligence. So even before then, we had looked, and the reason why I love depositions is my attorneys are much more efficient when they do depositions because they know the value of a case. They can advise the client. I can tell you from when I had cases, and I haven't had cases in a long time, but when I had cases, there was nothing more convincing to a client than a cold transcript where the witness said exactly what the client said the witness would never say. They would say, oh no, this person said, and all of a sudden I would show them the transcript and they would be, okay. So, it's the moment that they would look at it and say, I really have to evaluate what my chances are. I really have to evaluate where to go on. So in terms of a policy, my only policy is you have got to be competent. You have got to be diligent. And the tools that we have to do that, thankfully still, is depositions, is I have investigators that they can use. I have experts that we can hire and we can pay for experts. So there are different tools that they have and they know they have to do that. There is no requirement of attorneys having to depose every single witness because you don't need every single witness. And the reality is, as a lawyer, you should be able to determine what information do I have. And now, unlike when I started practicing, we have body-worn camera. Now, when you have body-worn camera, there's another tool that can tell you, okay, this is what actually went down versus what is said on the arrest affidavit, what is said on the offense incident report, or, what is said even in the information.
Right. Michael and I have different opinions on the depots because we approach them a little differently. I see Michael's point. I'm sure you've been doing this for years. I can see Michael's point. I will say this, Michael and I have talked about it. If you're going to take depots, you got to really, and I can't emphasize this enough, you really have to be careful what you do and what you say. Because to Michael's point, I used to sit in on, for example, on every depot. When I was a state attorney, I sat in on every single one of my depots. Why? Because if the defense lawyer was not skilled, he let me know everything he was going to do. I knew their trial strategy just watching that. No, it's true.
Give away the farm.
That's right.
But if you're very skilled at what you're doing, nobody can really tell because and that's what should be a show for another time. It'd be a 2-hour show. But there is this value, and the body warrants. Amazing. The body warrants. That's one of the things that I look at every case I get. I will not plead it out till I get the body warrants because so much comes up, like Carlos said, in the body warrants that many times you can show your client, like you said, and have that come to Jesus with them where they refuse to admit what's happening until they see the.
You mean like the DUI client who tells you that he didn't have any drinks, but then couldn't stand up on both sides and fell on his face?
How about the DUI client who says to me, "No, I didn't say that," and he's in Broward County. He rear-ended another car, total losses for everybody, and he's sitting there telling the cop to just let him drive home. He lives right down the street in Commercial Boulevard, and the cop says, "Sir, you live on 57th Avenue in South Miami, Dade County, Florida. Yeah, right. I'm down the street. He's like, no, you're in Broward. You're in Commercial Boulevard.
Oh,
He did not. He thought the cop was lying when he wrote that on the A form. So I had to show him the body worn and be like, dude, look at yourself. Listen to
well, and
Carlos, you also
Yeah.
brought up investigators, and I want to just spend a minute talking about staffing issues, because I mean, you have 200 and some odd lawyers, but you got 400 and some odd employees. You have secretaries, you have paralegals, you have investigators. Who do you have on full-time staff other than attorneys?
I have investigators. I have mitigation
But
specialists.
wait, I don't mean to cut you off. When you say you have investigators, how do you hire your investigators? Who are these folks? I mean, not by name, but by trade.
We hire them very carefully. So the people that we have over the years, we've had former police. We've had individuals that have gotten training on the outside. We have individuals internally who have become investigators by getting mentored by other really good investigators from years ago. You may remember Jim Grady, who was in our office. Jim Grady was a great mentor to a lot of our investigators, and we've allowed people to move up. But here is one of the key things. Investigators are part of my salary budget. Depositions are not. So when I have the depositions and I bring witnesses in, I can manage my budget better by not having to send investigator out to talk to hundreds and thousands of witnesses. So there is a give and take, and I look at it as an efficiency issue and also a managing my budget issue.
Who else do you have on staff other than lawyers and investigators?
So I have secretaries, I have clerical staff, I have 2 staff that actually work directly with the jail. One of them is a jail liaison, and her work is whenever there's a medical issue or any kind of issue, getting a client released, something that was botched, a quarter.
So basically, she works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and never sleeps.
She actually does. She actually does. And people text her and she'll tell, and I'm like, oh my God, please. But the good news with having that individual is that we've developed a culture that when a client calls you about a problem they're having at the jail, do not try to solve it yourself. So instead of using attorney time to figure that out, I use the staff time to be able to do that.
Plus, you get a lot further with sugar than you do with spice.
You nailed it. And then
and you had mentioned also mitigation experts.
Yes.
Are they in-house?
They're in-house. So I have mitigation specialists, many of whom were trained as social workers. Some were not trained as social workers, but we provide them intensive training and supervision. I also have placement specialists. So those are the ones, if I need a client placed in a substance abuse program or in a mental health program, I get the disposition specialist involved to get that worked out and the client out.
You had an awful lot of hands-on time in the mental health arena, didn't you?
Oh, I do. I still love that arena because to me, it's the area where we can have the most impact. If we can deal with the number of clients that we have that have serious mental illness, and we are able to try to figure out with the courts and with the state attorney, where can we place these individuals so that they can get the services that they need, and primarily so that they don't come back into the system. So we have focused, and I don't know how you know that I'm focusing on mental health. I got to figure out who your source is, but it's good.
A great investigator too.
I can tell you.
Right. Well, that's good.
I can promise this, Carlos. It's not my wife who did for the state attorney, Ashley Musa. And I may just jump in and say something else along the lines of collaboration. I was dating her when she was doing the mental health stuff, and I would hang out and watch. And I got to tell you, your office, the public defender that worked in the mental health unit with Ashley as a state attorney, mental health state attorney, it was amazing how well they worked. It was just truly, truly, they were like colleagues. I mean, never once was there any animosity, any, issues between them at all. It was always very friendly, very nice, always trying to do what was best for the patient or the defendant, client, whatever we want to call them here. It was really a beautiful thing to watch, honestly. And it's helped me a lot. Been able, because of that experience, I've been able to help a lot of my clients that a lot of private lawyers did not realize their mental health issues and just pled these guys out without saying, wait a minute, there's more going on here. And recently I was able to come in and get one guy that was sentenced to 77 months. And I was able to have the judge vacate the sentence and sentence him to 2 years of house arrest followed by probation, because nobody ever presented his mental health packet, which in fairness to the judge and everybody, I won't bore you with details. He was prescribed psychotropic medication when he was 5 years old, Carlos. 5. And nobody brought this to the attention of the state or the judge. And they sentenced this kid to 77 months in prison. And we were able to change that. And it was because I watched how the public defenders and the state attorneys get along so well.
So Michael, one of the questions, before the show that you and I had communicated about, was really about what role do the public defenders really play in the criminal justice system beyond the individual cases? And that's one of the areas that I'm most proud of. So one of the areas, the focus that we're doing now on revamping how we do mental health in our office. So to give you kind of a quick overview of what that is we used to have the Baker Act division. We used to have the mental health division for cases that are in felonies. We used to have mental health cases that are misdemeanor, mental health cases that are in domestic violence. We had them all over the place. So what I ended up doing last year is looking at the whole system and trying to figure out, why are we imitating the silos that the court has and that other agencies have? Why don't we look at a client, particularly a client with serious mental illness issues or substance abuse issues? Why don't we try to look at those clients and try to figure out, how can we identify them early? How can we divert them from the system, whether through court diversion, drug court, veterans treatment court, mental health court? How can we get to those so that we can actually have an early impact on what we do with those individuals? So in the planning process, as I'm putting this thing together with my team, one of the things that dawned on me after I'm looking at the arrest affidavits for a lot of these clients that were at TGK on the mental health floors, on the ones that are in crisis, I started looking at the arrest affidavits, and what jumped out at me was, I am going to go to the courts once I have information for about 6 months and identify to the courts, particularly with Judge Leifman, who has been on the forefront of this, identify to the judge, here are all the individuals that were arrested for things where a crisis intervention team police officer should not have arrested this individual. So in other words, we try to identify the blind spots. We try to identify, as the things that we're doing, the innovations that I'm doing in my office, is try to look at, where can we have legal system improvement that will actually make the lives better for the individuals, the residents of this community, but also the criminal legal system, on how we handle those individuals and how we handle those cases. So I'm glad you mentioned that one to me.
Thank you. And that kind of abuts with another topic I wanted to hit, and that is like community affairs and public awareness and public outreach. I mean, you have a website. I mean, that's plain. You have a phone number. That's plain. But you guys do so much more in the community. It's not just a public defender's office from, court hours 9 to 5, right?
Yeah, you are 100% correct. And look, I am totally blessed. I think you probably know Sofia Montenegro. Sofia Montenegro is a star in my office. She's been a star. And Sofia Montenegro handles the community role essentially by herself. She gets some other help in my office from another individual, from Myra Lindsay, who handles some of my special projects. But I can tell you, we are doing, and we've been doing since 1998, we've been doing the Redemption Project. That's another Redemption Project. It started out helping individuals to seal and former clients to seal and expunge their records.
Which, by the way, your office has absolutely no obligation to do.
Correct. So we ended up getting volunteers, and not just former APDs volunteering, but private attorneys, immigration attorneys, and we also bring in Transition Inc. so that people, even if they come and they don't qualify for sealing and expungement, then maybe we can help you get a job, because Transition Inc. works with individuals and companies who hire people with records. So we took that on. We took that on in 1998 on a volunteer basis. And we were completely thrilled when Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, a number of years later, ended up adopting that same model and using it. I think it's called her Second Chance program. And because she has staffing for that, she can actually do it every month in different parts of the community. And we help with that. So we send volunteer attorneys to be able to advise individuals as to what to do, where to go next. Because sometimes, as you know from practice, not everyone should be sealing their records without doing some things first. And so that's been an important part. And we've worked with the state attorney on that for a number of years. We do Play It Smart, which is community education, so kids know how to interact with the police so that they don't get arrested. And the last one that we do is the consequences aren't minor. And that one is to teach individuals about the consequences of an arrest or a conviction. And I can tell you, Kathy Rundle has been bringing me in to teach that to her lawyers for the last few years. And so has the Miami-Dade Police Department, because they want to make sure that law enforcement knows the impact that they can have on an individual's future.
You might want to teach that class to some lawyers, some private lawyers. Just saying.
Let me hit on just one or two more things before we run out of time.
We will follow up on a CLE for that.
Thank you. You have a couple of specialized units that we come into contact with. The community probably doesn't know about, but I want to give a shout out to ERU and CLU and your appeals unit. I don't know if there's any others that you have, but those three units are important. Maybe you could just explain a little bit about what they do.
Yeah, so our ERU is our early representation unit. That was started by Bennett 32 years ago. And the focus of that unit initially was try to figure out how can we get individuals from first appearance, try to figure out a way that we can get them out into the community so that they can wait for their cases while they're out in the community and we can communicate with them regularly. So ERU does a fantastic job, and they work with the state attorney's office. So if they have any evidence to show that they should be reducing the charges, not filing charges, we bring that to the attention of the felony screening unit at the state attorney's office. Capital litigation has been a phenomenal unit for years. Bennett started that in the 90s, and we've continued with that. And we have tremendous expertise of our lawyers there. The last one that I want to give a plug to is the new behavioral health division. those folks that were handling Baker Act, drug court, and all those things, they are now coalescing, and they are now part of a comprehensive approach that we have to representing clients with serious mental illness and clients with substance abuse issues.
Let me just throw another little plug out there, because Ed said something earlier that rings absolutely true. There's no better training ground for being a litigator than either working at the public defender's office or the state attorney's office, wherever your personality happens to steer you. I don't think it much matters one way or the other. Some of our best attorneys and judges are former ASAs and APDs. If Kathy ever comes on our show or sends someone on our show, I'll be happy to talk about former assistant public defenders. But, people that I came up with, I told you I worked with Jay White and Rick Friedman. They trained me, but I also shared office space with Steve Patulski, who's a top tier former assistant public defender. Barry Wax, who's another outstanding attorney. Roy Black, a former Miami-Dade County public defender. Jose Baez, Jack De Niro. There are so many I could rattle off names. I apologize to anybody who I'm not mentioning, but I want to hit some of the judiciary, starting with our chief judge, Nushin Safi, former assistant public defender, Louise Krieger Martin, Lisa Walsh, Oscar Rodriguez Fonce, Mayvel Ruiz. I believe Stan Blake was a PD too, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
So
and Lourdes Simon as well.
And Lourdes Simon, and there are so many others. And again, I apologize to anyone I'm not naming. There are just so many of you. Because it's such an incredible place to come up. And as I said, I didn't have the privilege of serving as either an APD or an ASA, but I did grow up in your office, literally. Probably spent more time at your Bennett Brummer building than at the White building where I had my law office for the first 13 years of my practice. Carlos, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this time with us and talking about your office today. It's been really just wonderful. I can't thank you enough for all of the work that you do, for everybody in the system that you impact, for everybody in the community that you help, whether they know it or not, directly or indirectly, for the Private Bar Association, for making judges better judges, calling them out, not, pardon my language, but taking crap from them. When they get out of line, they have to be put in place, and public defenders do that, and state attorneys too. Your office is inspirational. You have a great team working under you, but it all trickles up to having great leadership.
Yeah.
So thank you so very much again for everything that you do and for your time today. We really hope that you'll come back and join us some other time. We look forward to continuing our CLEs and everything else, and anything that we can do to help you guys is our great privilege and pleasure.
Yeah,
Michael and Edward, thank you so much.
I can't emphasize enough. I agree with everything Michael said. The next time that I'm up and running, because I'm on house arrest from doctor's orders. But if I'm ever in the public defender's office again, I'm going to look for you. Come say hello. So don't avoid me. Don't tell your secretary that you're not in. Don't be like, oh no.
I think that's technically a threat against a public servant. If you'd like, I'll be happy to call over to the state attorney's office intake window.
You have my cell number.
I do. Have your cell number.
If you don't, Sophia will send it to you.
I have it. I have it from back when we worked together. It was always a pleasure, man. You're a great guy, and you're doing an amazing job with the office. You really are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you to our producers over at Miami East Communities Newspapers. We appreciate everyone's time. We hope you've enjoyed episode number 60 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. There's not going to be a show next week. I have a trial call. So God willing, I will be achieving substantial justice next to an assistant public defender in Miami-Dade County Court. Thank you guys very much. We look forward to seeing you all next week. Carlos, thank you again.
Thank you.